there's no discount associated with selling to an ESOP. No discount. You can sell tax-free, you can operate tax-free, and you can maintain full control of your company post liquidity event.
Welcome to Friends of Build magazine. I'm your host, Ted Bainbridge. I've been traveling the world and working in publications for 30 years. In 2016, we launched our first issue of Build magazine, a publication dedicated to high-end home construction, renovation, and the innovative experts that make this possible. This podcast was created to have some fun and explore those who have taken on the challenge of building luxury homes in demanding locations. From navigating logistics in construction to excavating the earth, we want to learn more about these people and how their projects became cover-worthy. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Today, I've got Rich Gioia of Lazear Capital. You guys are in for a treat. I think you are going to learn so much, as I have. Talking to Rich, he is clearly the expert in the field of ESOPs, of which I had one impression after talking to Rich and getting to know him. It is a completely different ballgame than what I thought it was. And I think a lot of companies could benefit. So thanks for being on the show today, Rich.
Thanks for having me, Ted. It's great to be with you. Thank you.
All right. Rich Gioia, who I met in Park City through a very, very dear friend of mine, Charles Ocella with Vitruvius Built, who has just taken Park City by storm in the construction industry. And Rich, I was so fascinated talking to you at that party of all parties at Sundance in regard to educating us on ESOPs, and that the evil monsters really is super helpful facilitators. We're going to break a few myths today, right?
Yeah, we'll break a few myths, look forward to it. And there are worse places to meet than Sundance and Park City. I mean, it was great meeting you, great talking with a whole bunch of new people out in Utah. Love that place.
Well, so it's a little, that event was crazy because we had 350 people where the fire marshal said the limit was like 175. So a bunch of people stood outside at 10 o'clock at night for up to an hour in 8-degree weather, and they hung out because it was that good a party.
It was the place to be. They heard you were inside, Ted. They all wanted to come and join you.
I don't know about that. They couldn't have found me. It was it was a madhouse, but it was fun.
Yeah, it was fun. It was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great event, and pleasure to meet you, Ted. And thanks for having me on your podcast.
Okay, so talk to us about what you do and some of the common misconceptions that people have about your industry. Like, let's educate them, give them some real meat today.
Sure. And I'm happy to get there. Would you mind if maybe I started off with a little bit of background and kind of how we got to the...
Love you to.
Okay, perfect. So I think it might be helpful for some of your listeners because I have been a business owner many times over and still am a business owner. So it's not just ESOP advisory that I can weigh in on, but also can relate to many of your owners by sitting in their shoes. But I started my career as a lawyer. I practiced law for 5 years. And when I was 31, I decided that law wasn't for me. Got a little bored with it, and really always wanted to be an entrepreneur, wanted to own something of my own. Wasn't smart enough to have a great product or an idea, but what I did see is that in Western New York in particular, which I think embodies many communities in the US, that there were a lot of folks that owned good businesses but didn't have a succession plan. And demographically, they were at a certain age, and you had this out-migration of the rising generation that led to this gap in how people were starting a succession plan for their businesses. So I said to myself, maybe, just maybe, I could figure out a way to find a company without having any real capital and being a connector between companies and ownership that needed a succession plan and folks that had capital and that were looking for off-market investment opportunities. So I quit my job as a lawyer and launched that investment thesis with the idea of acquiring one company. And one company turned into 10 separate acquisitions, 10
Wow.
separate platform companies, and multiple add on acquisitions over a period of years. The focus for me at that time was an area of the market known as the lower middle market, because private equity, for the most part, has focused on much bigger business opportunities for a whole host of reasons that we don't have to go into here. But private equity has always been chasing bigger deals. And so the lower end of the market.
So quantify what is lower middle end? Because Buffalo lower middle end might be different than Park City or Salt Lake lower middle end, right?
Absolutely. Great question. Lower middle market, when I say it, isn't geographically nuanced. It's just broad applicability. And generally speaking, people have different definitions, but generally speaking, the lower middle market, as I define it, are businesses with between, on the very low end, 5 million in revenue up to 50, maybe 75 million in revenue. And that's the bulk of businesses in the United States. There's a lot of companies in that range. And because private equity has historically ignored those companies, ignored that size of the industry, I said to myself, I'm going to jump in, I'm going to find businesses, and we're going to help succession plan. But, the focus would be, how can we take those businesses, work to professionalize those companies, make them a little bit better, improve them, and then hopefully sell them. And so did that many times over.
Was there a particular vertical that you were focused on? Or
No,
was it you didn't care?
didn't care. The criteria was financial, so lower middle market, geographical, so kind of upstate New York, expanded to the Northeast, with the idea that there was opportunity to improve the companies. And the thought process behind improving those companies was kind of more back end oriented, thinking about how to professionalize them, not necessarily how to turbocharge the top line because we have all these contacts in a certain industry, but just to basic blocking and tackling. And so one of the companies I acquired was an HVAC related company in upstate New York, actually Rochester, New York. And we acquired it in late 2019. And a few months later, COVID hit and everybody's thinking the sky's falling and what are we going to do? But what COVID wound up doing was putting some real tailwinds behind us, because for a variety of reasons, it actually helped the business and grew the industry. And I hired a firm in 2022, so only a few years later, Lazear Capital, to sell my company. And Lazear is an investment bank that's primarily focused on ESOP. I did not know that at the time, but they have a practice that's dedicated more to traditional investment banking, helping business owners sell their company. And we had a great exit. We sold to one of the largest strategics in the industry. Lazear then asked if I would speak on a panel about my experience working with them in New York, which I did, and I agreed, and I spoke about my history in M&A and transacting with them. The panel was done, and then there was a second panel. I just happened to be waiting for my ride to the airport, and it was all about what Lazear does, which are ESOP transactions. And as I sat in the back of the room and I heard all about ESOPs, I couldn't believe my ears, my eyes, what I was seeing and hearing, that you as a business owner could sell your company effectively tax-free, tax-deferred, and ultimately eliminated. You can, as a result of an ESOP, become a tax-free organization, and you can sell it, but still retain full control over it. I couldn't believe it. I had to dig in, and that's how I got to ESOPs.
Literally just left a meeting. I was running late and we started talking about this contractor here in Scottsdale. And I said, yeah, they were close. So I'm talking to one contractor and he mentioned, I get all the remodels from this other contractor. I go, I thought they were going to become a client for Build Magazine this year. And I go, I think we're pretty close. And he goes, yeah, they just became employee owned. And so it's funny that that's our topic of conversation today.
Oh, it's great. Well, that's, very timely conversation. Sorry for the long-winded introduction, but I think it's important just to share that as someone who I would I would think of myself as more M&A experienced and almost an expert in the space, being a lawyer and then being in it for almost 15 years as the gladiator in the ring. I didn't even know anything about ESOPs. And when I first heard it, I fell off my chair. I said, I've got to understand more and I've got to figure it out.
No, long-winded, that was good because, like I said this to you when we first met. There is a misconception to ESOPs. I know I got a buddy of mine who owns a massive brewery, nationwide brewery, and I golfed with him a couple of days ago, and I've known him, Gary, for 25 years. He had transferred his company over to an ESOP because he was starting to unwind and didn't have anybody to take it over. And the last thing he wanted to do was sell it to uh, venture capitalists or another one like AB or one of the big guys because he's intensely proud of what he built. And he didn't want his employees to kind of be swept under the corporate giant rug. So that's why he did it.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And you hear that motivation a lot. But let me, to answer your question, perhaps demystify
Yeah,
and
please.
clarify a lot of the things that are associated with an ESOP. First and foremost, there is solely an altruistic motivation to sell your company to an ESOP, and that the only reason you're doing it is to benefit your employees. While that's true and it happens, it's not simply an altruistic motivation. If you look at the numbers, it has a capitalistic orientation to it as well. And the net proceeds on an ESOP exit can oftentimes do exceed what you could get in the marketplace if you went to private equity or strategics or a third party. So, first myth, it's just altruistic. It's almost like a charitable endeavor. That's not the case at all. Put the numbers side by side, and you'll see that ESOPs on an exit to a seller can outperform and often do a third party sale. Second myth is that in addition to the motivation and this kind of charitable endeavor, that there's this discounted valuation that you have to take as a seller to an ESOP. And that's also not true at all. If you're an ESOP seller and you hire a firm like Lazear Capital to go out and walk you through this whole process, Lazear will explain how everything works and work with the seller side, sit side by side, explain it to them. But there's no discount for it. We use the same type of approach that any sort of third party would use when valuing the company. Third is that you hear about these tax benefits associated with ESOPs, and it's a big driver behind them. But this is where I just ask myself, is this even legal or not? But you can sell your business tax free, and your business becomes tax free. That's incredible. How do you do that?
Because that is incredible.
It is incredible. So it's the law, and it's not a loophole. It's lawyers being lawyers. It's the law. And the reason for it is that most folks in this country, about 40% of folks in this country, rely solely on Social Security and don't have enough retirement savings. So Congress, in a rare bipartisan effort, has said that ESOPs make a lot of sense, and we want to narrow the gap on the wealth disparity in this country. So rather than continuing to pile more and more taxes on the top earners, an ESOP is really kind of a unique way for a bottoms up approach in empowering the folks at the bottom, giving them more money versus taking more away from the top. So there's an incentive for folks to sell their companies to employees, and that incentive comes in the form of tax trade-offs.
Okay, so I got two questions that one I wrote down and one I'm going to ask before I forget. So one is, why don't more companies do an ESOP? And the second is, a lot of people that I know have sold their companies to individuals, other companies, or private equity only to buy them back for 10 cents on the dollar because they were mismanaged. So how do
Okay.
you avoid that with the ESOP?
Let me start with your first question. Why
Okay.
do more people not pursue ESOPs?
Yes.
My opinion is because they're so widely misunderstood that most sellers don't understand, or they think that, again, it's just a charitable endeavor. I'm giving the company away to my employees, or my employees have to come up with the money and they don't have the money, or
Yeah.
there are personal guarantees with that. None of that is true at all. Your employees don't contribute any cash in an ESOP. You, as the seller, should not have to personally guarantee any of the capital that comes in. And that's how Lazear will work to structure our deals. And I just think they're widely misunderstood. And if people knew more about them, they'd pursue them a lot more frequently.
So does the money come from taking that business to the bank funds it, and then that becomes debt on the books for the new entity being the staff?
In large part, that's correct. So there's really kind of three parts of an ESOP transaction. So break this down, kind of focus economically for a second. So at close, you as the seller will get a portion of the purchase price.
So
Well,
let's
let
say
me,
you sell it for 20 million. You said
okay.
arbitrary number.
Okay, so let's say you sell it for 20 million. You would get between maybe 20, 35-ish percent. Sellers can kind of feel that out. We can work with them on whatever they think makes the most sense for themselves and for the company at closing. So they get a chunk of that capital at closing in that percentage range. That's payment number one. Payment number two, which comes over time, typically 4 to 5 years-ish, give or take, is what's a seller will hold a note. And the note is payable from the company to the seller. And usually that note carries about a 12% interest rate. And you're paying interest only on that note on an annual basis. And after you deleverage the bank note, and the bank note is the closing payment. And typically you'll go back to the bank every year and you'll refinance. And when you refinance, you'll pay off a percentage of that principal on the seller note. And then the third form of consideration is warrants. So the seller, this is like a second bite at the apple. At closing, a seller will get the right to buy stock in the future, buy stock in the company in the future. And that can often amount to perhaps another 20% of the enterprise value at closing. So three forms of consideration, just the bank, the seller note, and the warrants.
Okay, so let's take that 20 million number. So you sell it for 20. Well, for easy math, we'll use 25%. So the owner gets $5 million, and then there's a note from the bank for 15, less whatever fees Lazear Capital charges, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And then on the 15, you get 12% of the 15, which is $180,000 a year for the next 5 years while they're paying down the $15 million capital. Is that correct?
That's correct. And, many
And I'm
people,
not that smart, and I got it in 3 minutes. That's
there you
you're
go.
doing a great job, Rich.
Yeah, we're demystifying it pretty quickly.
You're doing a good job.
And so the interesting part about how quickly these businesses can deleverage and how you as a business owner could say, well, it seems like a fair amount of debt. Is that a concern? Well, I think the answer is twofold. Number one, if and when you sell to an ESOP, you can become a tax-free organization. So you eliminate one of your biggest expenses in the company, which are your taxes. And that frees up a ton of cash flow to service that debt. Secondly, you as
Okay, hold on. So do you become tax free? By the way, it wasn't 180, it's 1.8 million a year okay. So are you saying that you become a tax free entity? Is that until the debt is paid, or is that in perpetuity?
as long as the business remains an ESOP, owned by an ESOP.
Okay.
Yep.
So
So
does that make it an S corp or a something where an LLC where it's just a flow through? So the government still gets their money. It's just on personal income as opposed to corporate.
So if you are an S corp, you will be tax exempt. If you're a C corp, there's a way to structure it so you're effectively eliminating your tax burden. We don't
Okay.
have to get in the nuances of it, but
Okay.
ultimately, I don't want to confuse the listeners too much, but effectively, you eliminate your tax, and we can walk your colleagues through that if they want to pursue it further. You wipe out your tax expense, allows you to service your debt, and you far more free cash flow, and you're typically out, say, about 5 years.
So
Paid in full.
Rich, what about the owner who is sold? So he's got the 5 million and uh no capital gains on that?
There's a provision in the code. It's called Section 1042. It's effectively the cousin to Section 1031. Many of your
Yep.
folks in your industry are familiar with the like kind exchange provision in
Yep.
1031. Well,
Yep.
Section 1042 is somewhat similar. And again, I don't want to bore your listeners with the details on it, but what's made Lazear successful, among many other things, is this unique strategy it has to effectuate 1042 and allow sellers to sell tax free. To your question, yes, you could receive that tax free.
So with a 1031, which is real estate, if you buy one piece of real estate, sell it, you can move the profits to another real estate purchase and just defer paying the tax. But ultimately, at some point, you're going to pay the tax. You're just moving it down the line. So if it's the cousin, I'm assuming the similar thought process is in place. It's just not a real estate transaction, it's a business transaction. Is that
Correct. The term in the code is qualified replacement property. And the unique scenario behind this is that on an ESOP transaction, you don't get 100% of your cash at close. But the standard for qualified replacement property, in order to be eligible under 1042 deferral, is that you have to redeploy 100% of the proceeds into qualified replacement property within a 12-month period. There's a challenge when you don't get 100% of the purchase price at closing. And Wall Street has come up with a concept. It's called floating rate notes, which allows a seller to lever up what they have and deploy it into qualified replacement property, which ultimately creates the tax deferral that you referenced in Section 1031, but there is a way to eliminate it altogether, and not just defer it, but eliminate it. And that's part of Lazier's kind of secret sauce that uh, I unfortunately can't share with you on this podcast, Ted, much as I'd love to.
no, no, that's okay.
Yeah, yeah. But it's a deferral with ultimate elimination.
Fascinating. Okay, that is interesting. So the IRS, so now that person who sold their company for 20 million gets 5 up front and then a note for 15. They're paid an interest rate along the way, and they're essentially paid out over the next 5 years. So they get the other 15 over the course of the next 5 years. Is that
That's correct.
essentially correct?
And then the warrants as well, which could amount to, another 20% of that $20 million enterprise value, which will typically be exercised towards the end of the term of the seller note. So when you put this all side by side, particularly in a high taxed state like New York, where I primarily reside, or California, you name it, but 20% federal capital gains rates, in New York, maybe up to close to 11%. And that's assuming you're getting capital gains tax treatment on everything. You could be at close to a 33% bite. Compare that on an ESOP sale where you can elect Section 1042 and defer and ultimately eliminate it. You just need to sell for 67 cents on the dollar of a third party offer, and you're coming out in the same position. But again,
Okay.
you don't have to, because there's no discount associated with selling to an ESOP. And that's the thing you really want the sellers to understand, owners to understand. No discount. You can sell tax free. You can operate tax free, and you can maintain full control of your company post liquidity event.
So, is there the risk, which was my second question, of selling and then buying it back for 10 cents on the dollar? Because there's always, in the sale of most businesses that I've done, they paid half of it up front and then half of it over the course of the next 2 years, keeping me involved in order to do it. And it doesn't necessarily pan out the way it was orchestrated. So I've always been told, hey, if you're going to sell it, be happy with the half you're getting, because there's no guarantee on the other half. And I know a lot of people that have bought back businesses for a fraction, but that wasn't the intent of selling it in the first place.
Correct. Yep. An ESOP, you can still sell the company to a third party, to answer your question.
Okay.
let me also, now that I think about it, address maybe another common myth associated with an ESOP, and that is that the employees are truly running the company now that they're owners, so to speak. But I mean, they're equitable, beneficial owners. They receive an economic interest in the company, but the board that controlled the company prior to the company selling to an ESOP remains the board that controls the company post ESOP, with the addition of a trustee. And the trustee is there for ERISA compliance, ESOP compliance. But that's, if the board decided that it was in the best interest of all employees and the trust to go sell the company, the board could do that.
What's the risk to the employees? What's the downside to the ESOP?
If you think about risk in terms of capital outlay, there's zero risk because the employees aren't raising or contributing any capital. It's an additional benefit and perk that the employees will get as a result of their employment. And so, I mean, being in private equity for 15 years prior to this, it's like we always tried to find the right incentives. And I think, as Charlie Munger once said, show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome. It's unique because ESOPs align those incentives between ownership, management, and employees perfectly. Your employees understand what the business is worth every year. They'll get a new valuation every year. They'll understand what percentage they've vested and what those shares are worth every year. But they haven't put up any capital to buy into the ESOP. It's just a perk. So again, from a financial risk perspective, it's all reward with zero risk. Perhaps if they decided to stay at a company too long, and the company didn't work out, that's a risk, I suppose, but they don't have to contribute any capital to the ESOP.
So it sounds like it's pretty much a no-brainer for people.
Well, I think it's a no-brainer to have a conversation and to understand that this is a transactional option that's so widely misunderstood and not considered with the traditional exit scenarios: private equity, strategic, management buyout. I mean, there's a fourth leg to the stool, and it has to be ESOPs. You need to consider it. And you're doing yourself a disservice if you're not considering it. If legacy is really important to you, you should consider it. If you're not, you don't need all of your money up front. If you don't wake up every morning and dread going to the office, you like the people you work with, you like your employees, you're willing to stick around for a few more years, you should absolutely consider this option.
What's your biggest hurdle in having conversations with people about their transition, what they're doing, what their exit strategy is, or what's the growth potential for a business? What's your biggest hurdle?
The biggest hurdle, I think, not just ESOP, but when I was buying companies, is that people don't think about it. Most companies in the lower middle market, most owners are so involved in the day to day that the owner is also the prime operator. That very often that individual is out bidding jobs, or they're out, doing the day to day, whatever it takes, and they're not thinking about it. When you're not thinking about a topic, you tend to procrastinate and brush it off. And you're kind of, it's looming in the back of your mind. You've got to figure something out. But I think for most people, they tend to postpone important decisions and clear up the clutter on their plate, the day-to-day clutter. So I think the biggest obstacle is getting people to just take an hour and talk to somebody. Call me if you'd like. I'm sure my information will be a part of this podcast. I'd be happy to serve as a free resource. So don't charge anything. Happy to talk to folks about where they're at. I could share my journey on some of the transactional considerations that were a part of my decision making. But you need to take the first step and really just start to think about it. What's my business worth? What do I want a transaction to look like? What do I want my legacy to look like? I came from a family business called Gioia Macaroni in upstate New York. And it was a third generation business, hundreds of employees. My dad and his brothers sold it, and selling it was probably the right thing to do, because by that point in time, the fourth generation just became so broad and the industry trends probably weren't in line with keeping it for another generation. But I know how hard it was and still is for them to drive by that building and see the name, on the building, but scrubbed, and the name, the pasta, the macaroni, all the products removed from all the shelves. I mean, legacy is important to many people.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, all we leave behind is our kids, and that's the legacy.
Yeah.
So if you've been a good parent, you got good kids, they'll create good kids. Being grandkids, create good kids. And I think you're right. I just watched a video about Steve Wynn, and it was about a 45-minute, from the start of Wynn to where it is today. And now he's completely out, and yet the Wynn name is still there. It's got to bug him more than all the billions he's got. He'd probably give it all back to have that Win name be. It is his, but it's not.
Right, right. I see that very often, and I saw it with my father and with my family. So I know what those sellers feel. But it's not as if, they're mutually exclusive goals. Legacy and liquidity don't have to compete. And that's the nice thing in an ESOP. You can achieve liquidity. You can have a net position ahead of a third party exit due to the unique tax benefits. You can be a hero with your employees and with the community, and you can preserve your legacy. They're not mutually exclusive choices.
That's interesting. I mean, I've learned so much just listening to you. Where do people find you?
Sure. LazierCapital.com. My email is rfg@laziercapital.com. Please look me up. I'd be happy to answer any questions. But Ted, what I think is most unique to our conversation is that contractors and builders represent the second biggest sector of ESOPs overall. And the ESOP transaction is unlike a third party transaction. It's not competitive, buyer or seller looking for one to win one up the other. It's a very friendly, collaborative process. Closing is effectively guaranteed, unlike in a third party deal. And contractors and folks that work in the custom home building industry, they represent a big chunk of ESOPs because, for the most part, private equity is not interested in buying into industries that don't have a recurring revenue base, that might have bonding or unions. And so if you're generally not seeing the interest from private equity, ESOP in many instances is your best scenario, and happy to talk on it.
Yeah, so let's talk about that because as I travel and talk to these contractors, Rich, that is one of their struggles and I've got several that they've made a great living for a long time, but they have no exit plan. Like their kids aren't interested in taking over. So they built this incredible brand, this incredible name, only to have it die when, not that they die, but they get to a point where they go, you know what? I don't want to work anymore. But what
Yeah.
do I do with my company? They kind of feel like they're handcuffed by their company that has provided so well for them.
Right. Yeah. What do you do? Like, how do you exit? How do you ultimately monetize it or pass it to the next generation? And it's a great question. People should absolutely be thinking about that. And if they want to understand how the ESOP can facilitate and serve those goals, happy to get into it with them. But it is a great tool to do so. In these companies, these like contractors and builders, I mean, they don't run big machines. They don't work from a factory. Their people are their assets. You got to think about, how do you secure your people? How do you make sure they're happy? How are they productive? How are you beating the competition? And there's no better way to secure your people than an ESOP. I mean, once they're all owners alongside you, studies have shown that their employees are going to be, ESOP employees are 5% on average more productive than non-ESOP employees. So like Charlie Munger said, show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome. These incentives are fully aligned.
So did Charlie and who was a big part of Berkshire, were they looking specifically like you talked to me earlier? So were they looking specifically for companies that were ESOP or the potential there? Because you said something earlier about you were a lawyer and then you bought an HVAC company and then you got into Lazear. And I kept thinking there's a model there. There's a secret recipe that you're able to figure out pretty quickly. And now you can take that and move it into any business. Hence your Charlie Munger analogy.
Right. Charlie Munger, to my knowledge, I'm not sure that he and Warren Buffett ever looked at an ESOP. I'd have to, double back on
Okay.
that. But it is, they were buying companies and they were holding companies for an extended period of time. Private equity generally tends to look for 5-year exits. And, with private equity, at record rates of dry powder and the number of private equity firms out there nowadays, like, it may sound great for a seller that all this money's chasing fewer deals and it results in a lot of overpayment, but what that often does is it puts a ton of pressure on the business to perform after you close. You got to see a return on that investment. So that can be and many times legacy destructive, because you've got to find a way to be better. We've got to squeeze out more from this machine. So we're going to cut expenses. We'll do whatever, but it's may have a negative impact on the business.
Well, I hear that a lot. I mean, private equity comes in and cuts the most expensive people, cuts the bottom people, which in a lot of cases probably should have happened anyway.
Right, right,
And
right.
they're just trying to strip it away so that they can make as fast a buck as possible. More,
Yep,
more than likely, just so that they can roll it over and flip it to somebody else.
right. Yeah. That's private equity. That's the name of the game. You're typically you're going to get a size premium in private equity. So the bigger you get, the bigger the multiple gets. And a lot of times you're rolling up, buying it 5, 6 times, hoping to get to a certain size. And once you do, you can sell it 7 or 8 times. But a lot of pressure on the people to perform post closing. ESOPs, you're just not going to have a similar dynamic.
Yeah, I've got somebody who I've known for years, an advisor of mine, and she's in the roofing. She built a roofing company up to 1,100 employees, sold it to PE. Then she got involved in PE and she goes, these guys are animals and they don't care about the company. They just, to your point, it's all about the multiple.
It's all about the multiple. Yeah. In an ESOP, it's you're going to get a fair multiple, not going to take a discount, get the great tax benefits. You can still maintain control. And in many industries, like the contracting industry, probably not a lot of alternatives other than, maybe ESOP's the best option. But I hope today we're able to really kind of demystify some of it and break it down a little bit more. But you got it real quick, Ted. I mean, I was ready to bust out my calculator and start confirming your numbers, but you spoke so confidently. I'm like, all right, yep, you got it.
Well, no, but my brain was going, no, it's not
Yeah,
180, it's
yeah,
1.8. And then I
right.
got it. And
Yeah,
I'm okay making mistakes too.
right, right.
Because to your point, when you first started, when you're an entrepreneur, a lot of people need to have everything absolutely perfect before they launch anything. And if you do that, you're never going to launch anything because
Yep,
there's always variables.
yep, yep. Absolutely, absolutely. Well said.
All right. So, Rich, thanks for joining us on this episode of Friends of Build Magazine. Rich Gioia of Lazear Capital, very educational, and that was great.
Thanks so much for listening. If you've enjoyed the show, please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and leave us some feedback. We'd love to hear from you. You can find everything discussed in this episode and more in our show notes below. I'm Ted Bainbridge, and you've been listening to Friends of Build Magazine podcast.